Okay, it's been pretty steady here for a minute, so let's go ahead and kick this off. Welcome everyone, good afternoon to the third of three webinars on the EU mission for 100 climate neutral and smart cities, the call for expression of interest. So we have been over the course of the previous two and now this webinar going through the expression of interest questionnaire section by section, making sure we're sharing information about what's being asked for and to provide opportunities for people to ask questions and to get clarity about what information we're looking for and how to respond to the expression of interest. My name is, again, Thomas Astaba with Net Zero Cities and EIT Climate Kick. And I'll be moderating and facilitating the conversation. We have several colleagues from the European Commission and the mission staff. You can see who's listed here as the panelists. I'll introduce them very quickly now and then touch on a couple of housekeeping issues before we move on. Many of you are introducing yourselves in the chat, which is excellent. I encourage you all to identify where you're coming in from, and it gives us a good idea of who's here and we can keep track of that. The panelists will be Wiebke Pannekoek from the DG Research and Innovation. Sorry, I mispronounced the German there. I apologize, Wiebke. Nadja Vetters and Julia Upiani from the Joint Research Center, who've been instrumental in helping the Commission and us with pulling together the information kit, developing this expression of interest questionnaire, and providing a great deal of expertise and support to this process. So we're really appreciative of the time and effort and their knowledge about how to respond to this. So just a bit of housekeeping. As you're introducing yourselves in the chat, I also want to note that as you have questions, you want to look below on the bar of your Zoom window and see the Q&A button, and you want to click on that and put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, so that we can manage the Q&A and ensure that all the answers are captured and that we can keep track of all the questions as we go through the course of this this particular webinar. It's a lot easier to do that in the Q&A than over in the chat. So if we see some questions over there, we might ask you to move it back over to the Q&A. And then from that, we'll be capturing all the information here. We'll be sharing all this information. We'll be posting links relevant to the call, the expression of interest, and the previous webinars as well here as we go through things. So we're going to go through several parts of the questionnaire in sequence, and we'll have question and answer time in between each of those. So you don't have to hold on to your questions too long looking for an answer. And we'll try to answer as many as we can quickly in the Q&A window, but some we may need to open up the discussion and speak to directly. So that's how we'll proceed, and we'll look forward to the questions that you have and providing as much information as we can over the next 2 hours. With that, I'm going to invite Wiebke to come in and introduce the topics and the background of how we got to here so far, and we'll go from there. Thanks, Wiebke.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas, and good afternoon, everyone. So for those who haven't seen me yet, my name is Wiebke Pannekoek, and I work in the unit in DG RTD, who host the Secretariat for the Cities mission. But as you can see, this is really a cross-DG, a cross-sectoral approach to missions. So we have colleagues from different departments of the Commission present today as well. So indeed, this is the third and final edition of our webinars series. And we're going to cover the third and last part of the questionnaire, which will be sections 6 to 9 of the questionnaire. So on partnerships, on capital needs and investment strategies, on governance, barriers, risks, and assistance needs. But before we dive into that, I would just like to recall briefly again the different sources of information that you have available to prepare your expressions of interest. So I'm posting a series of links here, but we will post them also in the chat so you can copy them directly and don't have to type them out because they're long links. So what we have is an info kit for cities, which is a rather detailed document in 2 parts. The first part is a guide for cities, a practical guide that explains all the steps of the process that we're in now in terms of collecting expressions of interest, but also what happens after that. How does the selection process work? All these procedural steps, but also what are we looking for? What are the requirements? What are the benefits for cities? And then the second part goes into quite some detail in terms of the different areas that climate neutrality will have to cover. What does climate neutrality actually mean for cities, and how does it decline into the different sectors that your city is dealing with? We have put together a document of frequently asked questions. You may already have seen that. This is a living document that we're updating constantly. And now after this series of webinars, we're going to put online a new version in the coming days. And there we will flag as well, for those who've already seen it, we will flag if there are new questions and answers, so you can easily identify those that you might not have seen before. I've also put on the slide again the links to register for the call for expression of interest, and also an offline preview of the questionnaire where you can really see on paper where what the different sections and the different questions are. As Thomas said, we had 2 previous webinars on the 2 previous sections of the questionnaire, and both of those have been recorded, so you can still go back to them and watch them again, or if you have missed one of them, you can watch them at any time. Now, the second one is not online yet, but this link will become active very soon, and then you will see it there. It should really be today or at the latest tomorrow. And then I'd like to pick up just a few questions that have been brought up in previous sessions, or that also have reached us through other channels, for example, by email or in meetings. One question that has kept coming back is a question from cities who might think, oh, we're maybe not quite there yet. Will there be a second chance? Will there be a second call for expression of interest? And there I would like to be quite clear to say, this is your chance. This is the chance for your city to apply to the call. We don't have any plans for a second call for expression of interest, and we aim to select all 100 or possibly slightly more, depending on how many we get. We plan to select all of these participating cities following this one call. You may have heard as well already that we're also aiming for quite a balanced geographical representation, and would like to ensure that we have at least one city for each member state. And for that, we're currently organizing quite a lot of outreach to really see that all the cities who might be interested are aware and are in a position to respond. Another question that has kept coming back is very understandably a question on languages. So is this questionnaire available in other languages than English? Now, we've tried to get official translations from our translation department, but now the deadlines for this call are so short that we haven't managed to get official translations in time for them to be useful for you. But we have worked with our internal machine translation system, and are right now putting together what we call courtesy translations that will be published in the coming days as well, gradually, not all languages at once, but as they become available, we put them online straight away. And those you will be able to download via a link directly in the questionnaire. So on the right-hand side, you will see a box, and there you would then see the different icons of different languages, and you would be able to see different language versions. But I'd like to stress that those are not official translations. They're based on machine translation. We can't guarantee that they are 100% correct. And so in case you're wondering, or in case you spot a formulation that doesn't mean exactly the same thing in your own language as in the English version, then it is the English version that should be the definitive one. And then maybe briefly 2 practical questions. Some people are wondering what happens if several people in a city need to contribute to the questionnaire. How does that work in practice? So we would ask you please to only register once per city, so we can really make sure that we have one and only one definitive expression of interest for each city, that we don't receive duplicates. And with that, you will receive a unique link to the questionnaire, which is unique to your city, but which you will be able to share with colleagues. So this is no problem to work in parallel with others, maybe not simultaneously, that colleagues have advised against, but in parallel, things will not get lost if several people work on the questionnaire. And I would also like to say that if you have registered, it might take a day or possibly 2 days before you receive the unique link, because it's not an automatic process. Is a manual procedure where we just do these background checks to make sure that there aren't any duplicates, and therefore it might take a little bit of time, but normally within 2 days you should have the link. And lastly, one question that concerns the eligibility section, where we're asking for a code or ID for each city. So a number of people have wondered, they haven't been able to find the right code, or have wondered which of the codes applies to them. And in that case, we would really tell you, please just select other if you can't find the right one. This is definitely not an eligibility criterion and doesn't affect the substance of your application. So just select other if you're unsure what to select on this box. Yes, that was the questions I wanted to cover. And then I'd like to end with simply giving you again all our contact information. The first link is the functional email inbox that we're using for this call for expression of interest. So if you have any questions, just send an email to that address and we will make sure to get back to you. And if you like to follow what we're doing, or the progress of the work, all of the information is gathered in our website with the link that is posted there. And I would encourage you as well to subscribe to our newsletter. And a new edition should be coming out in the next few days as well. Yes, that was all I wanted to say. And so I hand back to Thomas. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Wiebke. Great information. All the links are there. If you're having any trouble, just let us know and we'll follow up. So with that, let's dive into the questionnaire, the rest of the questionnaire, and I'm going to invite Nadia Vetters from the JRC to begin with the section on partnerships. So take it away, Nadia.
Thanks a lot. I hope you can all see my screen already. So indeed, thanks a lot for the kind introduction. Good afternoon also from myself. It's really great to see so many of you back for the third time today. For those of you who are participating for the first time, my name is Nadia Vetters, and I work for the Energy Efficiency and Renewables Unit of the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. And just like last time, indeed, it will be our pleasure this afternoon, together with my colleague Julia, to walk you through the last 4 tabs of the questionnaire. Just like in the other questionnaire, in the other webinars, we'll do it by just hands-on walking you through the questionnaire and providing additional information or background where needed. Then, also something that has become almost a tradition by now. Before I'll go right into the content, there is one short technical remark on a rather specific issue that I wanted to make before starting. This may occur while you're working on your survey, and it concerns the upload of documents. It can happen, unfortunately, that files are not retained when you return to the survey after it has been saved as a draft. If you have used like the save as a draft button, which we do encourage you to do very frequently, it can be that when you resume the work, the documents that you had uploaded previously are not retained. You can check that For example, we have here like select files to upload button. I had uploaded this file, so you can see a list of the files that you had uploaded before. And it indeed can happen that not all the files or the files that you had uploaded are not there anymore. This sounds scary. This happens very rarely. It's a software problem with EU survey that is known, and it's in the process of being corrected. But we want you to be aware so that you can check and verify before submitting the final version of your survey. If you notice this issue, what we advise you to do is to keep the files locally, save them locally, all the files that you want to upload, and then upload them when you are about to submit your expression of interest, meaning just before the final submission of the questionnaire. We can reassure you that this problem does not concern this final step of the submission of a completed survey. So you can be sure that at that moment documents are retained. And indeed, we also updated the user guide with this issue. Yeah, I'm repeating, it's a very rare thing, but it can happen, and we'd like you to know about it and be prepared and not get scared. But of course, in any case, if you counter any issues like this or any other, don't hesitate to contact us also for these technical questions. Now, after this technical note, we can start with the first tab that we are covering today, the one on partnerships. Indeed, I think we all agree that collaboration with other levels of government, with citizens, different stakeholders, will be critical for all the cities to accelerate the transition to 2030 climate neutrality. So, as its name says, this tab is about partnerships exclusively, meaning here the questions give you the opportunity to describe with whom and how your city collaborates to advance your city's climate policy agenda. The questions do focus on existing partnerships. That means that when answering the questions, please look at what is currently in place and not what you maybe are intending to put in place or what you think would additionally be needed to accelerate the transition to climate neutrality. There is one exception to that, a question that is forward-looking, but I will point that out when we get there. So we are starting this section with a general question that is looking across citizens and all possible stakeholders that your city may be currently working with in the context of developing and implementing its climate change mitigation policies. So here again, please just select all that apply, all that you actively engage or collaborate with. There is no upper limit. Select all the applicable stakeholder groups. However, as a guiding principle, if a specific group is only targeted by a specific measure in the sense that it's being regulated or they have to comply with something, that's not what we mean by this question, then it shouldn't be selected. So further on, when we look down in this tab, all the cities, irrespective of the answers that you give here in this question, will see questions on focused on other levels of government, on citizens, and on other cities. So these first three here. However, if you indicate here in this question that academia and R&I institutions and the private sector are among the main stakeholders that you currently involve, you'll be invited to answer a series of additional questions. So they just appear if you have selected those two answer options here above. There's one thing maybe as a small follow-up to the last webinar where we had this question on citizen energy communities and renewable energy communities. So it's sufficient if it's either or to select this answer option. And maybe to say a word on the main difference, it would be that citizen energy communities are limited generally to the electricity sector, while renewable energy communities can cover any energy sector. Also, citizen energy communities, on the other hand, they can cover more activities ranging from generation, distribution and supply, consumption, aggregation, storage, energy efficiency services, and so on and so forth. While renewable energy communities can specifically cover only production, consumption, and selling of energy. So that was a short addition, as we touched upon this last time. Well, utilities, it refers to the providers of electricity, gas, water, sewerage. On vulnerable groups, we do not really offer a definition because it should be in the context of what is locally applicable. Any locally applicable frameworks you can apply here. And then if there are any other stakeholder groups that are important in your city, please do additionally select this option and then specify who else you are working with. Then we move on to other levels of government with a question on which types of support your city currently receives to formulate or implement its climate change mitigation policies. Again, in answering this question, there is no upper limit. You just select all that currently apply. So all the types of support that are available to your city. Yeah, there's, I think, not more to say here. The next question here gives you exactly the same answer options, but this time the question is about the future and which type of support and assistance would be most useful and critical to help your city achieve the mission target by 2030. So this is the one question that I wanted to highlight as it's as being forward-looking. So also, we want you to prioritize on this question, meaning here you can select only up to 3 answer options. It's basically a wish list of what you would like to see provided by your respective regional and national governments, and doesn't consider, or you shouldn't be considering in filling this wish list whether you think that it's very likely that you're going to get it, or this is actually going to be provided in the desired scope and quality. Then, as a follow-up question, we would then like you to give some further details and insights in specific activities and programs run or initiated or funded by your regional or national governments, specifically, well, those that you consider, that your city considers helpful in its transition towards climate neutrality. And here again, please do focus on what is already in place, not any future plans or expectations that you have. Then we move to the next stakeholder group, that's the private sector. Here, as mentioned above, you only receive or see this question if you have indicated above that the private sector is among the main, well, does play a major role currently in this context. So we simply ask you to describe any partnerships that your city has with the private sector and how those are conducive to reaching the climate neutrality target by 2030. So again, here, please do focus on existing partnerships. You see, also maybe to highlight, the space is rather limited. This is a few lines indeed. So brevity is a virtue here. It could be simply bullets naming the private sector entity or the type of entities and followed by a short description. There is then a follow-up question, this one. Where you can additionally indicate in which ways your city, to say it like this, your city collaborates with the private sector to advance its climate policy agenda. And this time you get a predefined list. So again, please just select all those which concretely apply, meaning where there exist concrete ways of collaboration currently. concrete, well, that would mean that indeed we'd expect the city itself to have an active role and a contribution. So, for example, it could very well be that private sector companies have made their own net zero commitments and set net zero targets. If the city did not have any contribution in setting or implementing those targets, then please do not select this option. That's this one I'm speaking about as an example. Yeah, sorry, one thing that I wanted to add here on the private sector is that it would also include financial services sector, even though we do have a separate section to which we will get shortly, like one block of questions in the questionnaire. Then the next block of questions is a bit longer. As we would like to learn more about if and how your city is engaging citizens in the design and implementation of climate policies, longer because this is something which is really at the core of the mission approach. As for many other things throughout this questionnaire, this information that you can provide here will be useful to help us to help the mission platform identify best practices, innovative practices, and what future support needs to be put together for cities in the mission. So the first question here inquires about what kinds of citizen engagement activities your city has in place. You may notice that this question, well, it's not limited to our topic, meaning here you could really reflect on current citizen engagement activities irrespective of the domain. We have given you in the help text some as you can see already popped up here, some examples like deliberative practices would include citizen assemblies, polls and surveys. Then ad hoc co-creation engagement practices that could involve a referendum about a specific issue or a town hall event with citizens about well, a particular planning issue across the city. What I wanted to say here is that what is important to distinguish between these two answer options is that with deliberative practices, one is really bound by a set of criteria that makes a participatory process a deliberation. That means that, for example, citizens are chosen by sortition and randomly, and they are representative of the city's population, meaning, well, of the demography of the city's population. Also, in a deliberative practice, what is deliberative to say, it should be binding, meaning the city or the citizens do influence the process they are involved in. In a co-creation practice, on the contrary, that's not guaranteed, or well, that's not the main definition. And the citizens recruited and participating, they might not be sampled by sortition or randomly. So that is just to distinguish these two first answer options. Then in the help text, you can also find some examples for informative practices. And awareness raising events and for educational activities and programs. Then here also, if you have any other types of citizen engagement activities that would not fall under any of the other categories, please additionally select this answer option and then briefly summarize the activities that your city is undertaking. Then we go on and ask if your city has any concrete programs or projects in place that do engage citizens now concretely in the formulation or implementation of climate change mitigation and greenhouse gas emission reduction policies. If this is the case, well, then you select yes, and then you have the possibility to provide some further details in follow-up questions. In this first description, sorry about this, one moment. So, in this description here, please do describe as concretely as possible the most important ongoing programs and projects and how they engage your citizens. This can include, and this is also summarized here in the help text, a description of the type of inputs that citizens are providing, the main outcomes of these practices, how they are taken up, or well, how they will be taken up by the city in formulating and implementing climate change policies. You could also reflect, if relevant, on the inclusion of vulnerable groups, and then finally, it would be much welcome if you can share any lessons learned that might help others to replicate your experiences. Then the next question that we have here, this one. It takes a slightly different perspective, and it's looking at how your city may be promoting cooperative behaviors with behaviorally informed interventions, meaning that are specific measures that have the aim of achieving behavioral changes of citizens, again, in the context of achieving mitigation goals. We have given here some examples of the type of possible behavioral changes that this may be targeting. Trying maybe to explain the less known or obvious ones. So a nudge that would refer to an intervention that encourage sustainable actions really by influencing the decision structure rather than by forbidding something or by banning any of the choices. So that could be done, for example, by changing the effort that is required to select a specific option. For example, and you can find more examples and descriptions in the info kit, but it could be by setting the desired outcome as a default choice. It could also be that you reduce the effort of that is associated with a specific choice. Or also under this category would fall measures that provide citizens with assistance in actually following through with their intentions. So as said, you can consult the info kit for further information. One-stop shops, well, in this context, they're typically used to incentivize building renovations and offer homeowners a bundle of resources and services, typically including technical advice and also support on financing. And then, as above, if there are any other interesting practices on ways of facilitating behavioral changes and sustainable lifestyle choices, then please do use this box here to tell us more about it. Then we move to the next stakeholder group, that's other cities. Here you have the possibility to further describe how your city collaborates and shares experience across its boundaries, nationally, internationally, starting with a question on how your city exchanges or collaborates with other cities on aspects related to the climate neutrality transition. You find here a set of answer options that indicate the degree of exchange and collaboration your city is currently engaging in. So this is a graded answer scheme from very active to not yet engaging in this type of activity. So to offer you some guidance, a city that is very active in national and international networks on the topic of urban climate mitigation, a city that regularly shares its experience with others in national, international fora, and maybe acts is a mentor city for others. Such a city would select, here I am, the first answer option. Then a city that is a member in city networks on this topic and takes part in peer learning programs with cities from different countries, for example, would choose the answer option 2. If you're actively engaged with your neighboring communities, cities in the same country, you'd go for that answer option. And also there is nothing wrong with indicating that your city is currently looking for these kind of opportunities, including as part of the city's mission, or also that currently no such exchanges are taking place. If you have chosen one of the first 3 here, you have said yes, then you're also invited to share some more details on how and with whom this exchange and collaboration is taking place. Also, I think in the last webinar, we briefly touched upon city network membership. So here would also be the space to indicate your memberships in city networks, if that's something that you would like to emphasize. And then the last question on other cities. This is particularly relevant for cities which are closely interconnected with their neighboring or their surrounding local authorities. And here we'd like to ask you to rate the intensity of your current level of cooperation with neighboring cities in those areas relevant to climate change mitigation. So if it is a strong, a long-standing, a formalized collaboration, then it would be 5. If there has been some ad hoc collaboration on some projects or initiatives in the past, it would be somewhere in the middle. And it can simply also be not applicable to you, depending maybe on the location of your city. But in this case, we'd ask you to very briefly explain your specific situation. Well, that concludes the block on other cities and leaves one more question on the last stakeholder group. That's again one that only appears if you have selected R&I institutions and academia as an answer above here in the very first. Sorry, it's a long block. In the very first question. So here we again ask you to describe them and how those partnerships contribute towards achieving your climate change mitigation targets. And ideally, because we do have a block on R&I projects in a previous tab, this information that you provide here would be complementary to the previous section. So that was it on the partnerships tab, and I believe we can pause for questions.
Thank you, Nadia. I think we'll start. There were a few questions talking about potentially groupings of cities, and there's one still open around a district within a larger city. So I'm going to ask Vipka to speak to that briefly, and then we'll come back to the question. There's still one outstanding question on partnerships. So Vipka, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So we covered groupings of cities in a previous webinar, and I see that colleagues have already replied to questions in the chat as well, but maybe it's useful to recall again. So I know that in specific cases, your specific city might be difficult to fit into a category or to fit neatly into the way we describe things. But we have differentiated between 2 scenarios. One would be a metropolitan region applying. And in that case, there would be one call for one expression of interest handed in on behalf of the entire metropolitan region. And then the other case would be a grouping of cities, in which case all the individual cities would hand in their own expression of interest and flag that they're part of a group. And in practice, when you go to that specific section about groupings, then you would see if you say that the application is part of a group, then and you tick yes, then there's a follow-up question that asks you to explain. And there I would like to just say again that generally, we don't particularly encourage groupings of cities, but we do recognize that they might make sense if, for example, you have very close links, if there's some interconnections, some joint plans, some joint investments already going on, for example, that then that is absolutely feasible. We would just then ask that you flag that clearly and that there's that it's clear which cities belong to this particular group. Thank you.
Thank you. On the partnerships side, I think this is really about the mechanics of responding to the questionnaire, Nadia, but what about partnerships that involve different types of stakeholders at the same time? So multi-stakeholder or multi-sector partnerships, how can we treat them?
Yeah, I wasn't sure where this would even affect the answers that you're giving, but of course, if there is a multi-stakeholder partnership, it could be the one and the same partnership that you are referring to across the different sections that do cover the different stakeholder groups that form part of this multi-stakeholder partnership. So you wouldn't need to limit yourself to mention it in just one place. That's like a very generic answer that I can give, but maybe if there is a very specific place in the questionnaire where you need more guidance, we can come back to it.
Great. So if that doesn't help you with this, please add to your question, and we'll circle back to it. I think in order to keep on track and time, Nadia will continue on. A public port authority. Which category of partners? Public port authority.
A public port authority? Well, I'd put that under other levels of government.
That sounds right. Okay. Thank you. We'll give just a second here if there are any more coming in. Otherwise, Nadia, why don't we begin with the capital needs and investment strategies section?
Okay, excellent. So, well, we'll move to a very interesting topic as well. So we speak now about the tab on capital needs and investment strategies. And to start with, that's probably the tab on which it's most needed to emphasize that a city is not expected to have done all of this, to have an investment plan or other things ready. This is really not a prerequisite for participating in the mission. So for the vast majority of cities, this work will start in a lot of detail once they have been selected into the mission. Also, I think we've highlighted it before, and it's mentioned here that indeed an investment plan that does specifically address actions to reach climate neutrality by 2030 will be an integral part of the climate city contract process, and that's something that will be developed with assistance from the mission platform in the next phase of the mission. So, well, you may wonder why we ask then. Nevertheless, it's really just to explore your city's current capability to estimate capital requirements for investment and the funding and financing needed for this transition towards climate neutrality, really with the intention to help us get the better understanding of current city-specific gaps and needs. So that's what this is about. We do start with a very concrete question on whether you have started to estimate the capital requirements for your city to reach climate neutrality by 2030, but reiterating here, not having done so is by no means an exclusion criterion. So we are speaking about this first question here. In this case, well, if you select no, you can see no further questions asked. If you select yes, then we do ask you to provide indeed the estimate in an absolute figure, like not a per capita number, and please in euros, because you don't have space here to indicate any other currencies. You can answer this question with yes also if your city has undertaken assessments on the capital requirements that are linked to your current levels of ambition, meaning not necessarily linked now to the 2030 timeline or full climate neutrality. So that's equally valid input to provide. And also you have further below then the option to upload supporting documentation to really further clarify the scope of the estimate that you are providing to this question. We then do go a step further and ask you if available to provide a percentage breakdown of the funding and financing sources and for like broad categories, again linked to this estimate that you have provided above. This would be then the share of own funds coming from the municipal budget, funds from regional authorities, national or EU funds, or funds from public financial institutions. That's falling here. Well, private capital and also in-kind, other. The category other, which could include in-kind contributions like land or use of infrastructure or also alternative financing elements. And as mentioned here, you can upload supporting documentation on the figures that you have provided above. Then the second block of questions in this tab is intended to allow for an initial reflection on your city's capital and finance capabilities, the experience up to date, and your city's investment readiness for climate neutral actions. Again, the info kit can be consulted, and obviously many other sources on this topic on planning and investment readiness. So we start with a first question that inquires whether your city has one or maybe several climate investment plans or strategies linked to your current climate action plan or your climate action plans. The answer options that we have here, they are graded. They look at how integrated the climate action plans are with the financial resources required and also identified in those plans for their implementation. So we would like to ask you to choose the most advanced answer option that best describes your current situation. So you have for all the questions also help text that guides you further. Then the next question asks if your city has launched in the past investment projects. Oops, here we are. Investment projects that involve citizens, private capital investors, technology or service providers. And the question here intends to explore your city's experience with complex investment projects that do involve multiple stakeholders, meaning at least all those stakeholder groups that are named in the question. And also to say that in this question specifically, we are not exclusively looking at projects that are linked to greenhouse gas emission reduction. What is more important here is indeed the complexity of actors, capital structure, implementers involved. Again, it's a graded set of answer options, looking at the experience of the city with investment management. And as above, please do select the answer option that you feel best describes your current situation and experience up to date. One last thing, we have not defined what we mean here by small or large projects, but it should be understood as commensurate with the size of the city. Then I'm sorry. I think I moved here in the questionnaire too far. I was speaking about this question here. So I'm sorry for the confusion. We are moving to this question now. So here we are asking you to reflect on the experience of your city in involving private sector operators and investors. Here again, cities can have multiple approaches to really bring the private sector to the table. It can be formally through consultation, systematic hearings on the priorities of the city, through financing requirements, national and European. Cities may be actively looking for these resources with the objective for choosing then really from a broad selection of potential financial mechanisms. We do speak here about assessed in the question. So assessment of the capital ecosystem could be any sort of like capital mapping exercise, gap analysis that your city may have undertaken. Here again, please do choose the answer option that best describes the current situation. But in this question, this is not a graded set of answer options. Then if you have chosen anything else but no here, then we would like to ask you in a follow-up question here to use the opportunity to describe this current investor community that is actively contributing to climate actions in your city. Please describe how your city has engaged this ecosystem individually or as a whole. And also you have space here to reflect on your city's capital and finance capabilities, the approach currently in place, and also whether you have access to and make use of any finance advisory services. We also summarize this in the help text that you find directly in the questionnaire. So this one here. Then we move to the next question. And here we inquire about the degree to which your city is actively working with established investment and finance partners in view of building a project pipeline. So a finance ready pipeline, that would mean projects that projects, a selection of measures, actions for which a detailed analysis for technical and financial implementation has been undertaken. Here again, we do offer a graded set of answer options, and please choose the one that best describes your current situation. And then finally, we are concluding this tab with a question on innovative financing instruments. So in answering here, you can select all those instruments that your city is currently using or has used in the past in the context of climate action, but also in other domains. So here the experience with the instrument as such is important, not so much now the topic that was covered. You can find a description of the answer options also here in the help text. You can consult the info kit for further information, and also here, if you have any other financing instruments that you have worked with that are not listed here, please do provide a short description of the instrument and how the city the financing tab. So we'll pause for questions.
Okay, thanks very much. We have a few here. I'll start with this one. I think it's relatively straightforward. We have some funding for the next years, but are more uncertain about years from 2024 onwards. How to indicate yes or no on this option would be quite helpful.
Well, that definitely, I think, merits a yes answer
Exactly.
and a further explanation. So indeed, it's not required to have now a full-fledged plan, and nobody will have probably for how you're going to finance the transition until 2030. But whatever estimations, assessments have been undertaken are a valuable starting point, and you can definitely you are encouraged to fill those in the questionnaire.
Thank you. Capital needs. Has your city launched investment initiatives and projects in the past that involve citizens, private capital?
I'm not sure if it's just me, but I don't hear Thomas anymore.
Yes, I think we have lost Thomas. I think he was reading, has your city launched investment initiatives and projects in the past that involve citizens, private capital investors, and technology service providers? Would a participatory budget be considered as an investment initiative involving citizens?
I'm not sure if I have a straightforward answer here. I think it depends a bit on the details. If it's about budget planning and participatory budgeting, without going now into the concrete investment projects and the actual management of the investment, that I'd be inclined to say that's maybe not sufficient to answer yes to this full question, where we are looking at complex investment projects that would involve citizens and, in addition, the private sector and technology service providers all together. So a participatory budgeting process alone, while it has, of course, its merits, in this specific context of the question, I wouldn't consider yeah, as in itself sufficient. But it depends, of course, on the details, which we don't know about now.
Mhm. And then maybe there's another question here. We have some funding for the next years, but I'm more uncertain about the years from 2024 and onwards. How to indicate that? Yes, no?
We had just covered that
Sorry,
before.
okay. So it's yes, no?
Yes, absolutely.
Then there was a question here as well. Is a certain fixed amount of financial support that each city can expect, or is it depending on a relevance ranking? So maybe there I can start saying that, so the way the mission is set up is there will not be any direct financial support to cities just by virtue of becoming part of this program. There will be various opportunities. So there is our sort of what we call our seed funding from the Horizon Europe program, where we fund research and innovation activities, and we fund the direct support through the mission platform. There will be demonstrators that will be funded. And then as a second step, we will also look at facilitating access to funding from other sources, so from other EU programs, from also hopefully from national sources, and all of that should be condensed through what we call the mission label. So once a climate city contract is adopted for a city, then that would give the city access to this mission label, and through this mission label, then we will try and unlock additional funding sources. And we will also be working with the European Investment Bank and also with national banks to see how we can really also get the lending and also possibly blending possibilities involved. I don't know, Nadia, if you might want to add something to that. Otherwise,
I think that was very comprehensive.
We can see if Thomas is back.
Otherwise, I can take the last question that I can see here in the Q&A, which concerns if the city selects perimeter for climate neutrality by 2030 larger than the geographical boundary of the city, which is to be done in the beginning of the questionnaire, for example, concerning carbon sequestration and offsetting. Is this something to be specified in the partnerships? I would say that very much depends. Like in itself, yes, if that involves like a collaboration with neighboring communities, for example, where you would, I don't know now in the background, but if the offsetting and carbon sequestration is taking place in other municipals' territories and you collaborate with those to that end, yes, absolutely. If it's with the technology providers or a private sector investor or company on I don't know, technical carbon sequestration, also absolutely. I just wouldn't see like an immediate link to the answer in the eligibility section. So I'd say consider it from the perspective of partnerships, and if it makes sense from that perspective, then please absolutely specify it in this tab as well.
Great, thanks very much, Nadia. Let's see, is Thomas back? Thomas, do we have?
I am, if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Very
we can
well.
hear you, we can see you.
I apologize for that. That was rather rude of the internet to cut me off. Maybe I was saying the wrong thing. Anyway, good to be back. I just, before we proceed forward, I want to just check if you may have tackled this question. What exactly is meant by the city in regard to estimating capital requirements? If we've already addressed that, only the sovereign area of the municipality or municipality with dependent associated companies, special purpose entities, or even independent associated companies.
If this refers to like city's own budget, then I'd consider it like the city and its municipal budget and everything that covers, like that is publicly funded. I'm not sure about the rest. I think here what we are targeting is like the origin of where funding comes from, whether that's indeed raised by the municipality as such as part of the budget or not. Not sure. Maybe Thomas, you would want to add something here.
Yeah, estimating capital requirements. I mean, if this is addressing things like utilities that may be publicly owned or cooperatives or even privately owned partnerships with the city or municipality, you should definitely include their capital requirements because that's part of the investment that would be needed. So if these are clear areas where investment is needed to deliver on the city's climate neutral targets, then I would say they should be included. And again, there's not a right or wrong here. This is really about gauging capital needs and getting an assessment of how far the cities are along in doing that. So this isn't a qualifying criterion. It is or part of the questionnaire. This is to get more information about where things stand at the moment. So if you know what the capital requirements are for situations like that, I'd encourage you to include that.
I see one additional question on the estimated value and whether we should consider all interventions for reaching climate neutrality or only the 3 interventions that were identified in the future picture. No, definitely all of them. So it's not restricted to those that you have described in earlier parts of the questionnaire.
That's right. I was just going to type an answer on that, but yes,
great.
Definitely include all. Another question. I've been told that a guideline to structural funds management authorities about the mission label will be delivered. Could you tell us more about it?
That's probably a question for Wiebke.
Let me just, sorry, I was just reading something else.
No, it's all right.
The
So guidelines on
structural
the
fund
structural
management
funds.
authorities.
Mission
Well,
label.
about the mission label, I mean, definitely that's, so this is still work in progress for us as well, because you can imagine this is quite complex to define what this mission label should look like in detail, what exactly will be the types of things that it will be able to do, and also how it will then interrelate between the different EU programs, but also possibly national programs and other sources of funding and financing. So we will definitely provide further information of that as we go along. Guideline to structural funds management. Right now, I don't know what if that's something very specific that has been referred to in the past. That I would have to look up quickly. I would get back to you there. But there is definitely more guidance coming out on the mission label as we proceed.
Great. Yeah, I think that's definitely something that's in process, and the idea of the label will be a tool to help improve access to such kinds of funds and as well as other things. So that's definitely a key priority of the mission, and one of the things we'll be working on a great deal. Just typing an answer here, but maybe I'll bring it up and then we'll proceed. When describing investment needs, private means companies or also citizens' private investments, for example, e-vehicles. Should these two be separated? Nadia, while you're looking
sorry,
at,
yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I was just going to say, while you're looking at it, what we're really trying to do is gauge the degree to which your city may have estimated those capital needs. So if you do have it at that level of specificity, by all means include it. Nadia, I'll allow you to weigh in on the specifics of the questionnaire.
Yeah, indeed. I think we don't go to this level of detail in the questionnaire, so it really depends of what you have at hand. But indeed, as Thomas outlined before, we are looking at the whole range of what will be needed by all partners and stakeholders, private and public, to get to climate neutrality by 2030, and that obviously goes beyond like what the city itself will have in terms of investment needs.
Yeah, please follow up, Michael, if you have more detail on that question. But let's keep moving along so we have time to get through everything. So now we'll move on to the next section on governance, and I will invite Julia to take it away. Thanks, Julia.
Thank you very much, Thomas. So my name is Julia Piani. For those who didn't attend the previous webinars, I work for the JRC, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. I'm going to share my screen now. Let me know if you can see the questionnaire nice and clear. Confirmed?
Confirmed.
Good. So I'm going to walk you through the last two tabs. The first one is about governance, and the second one is about barriers, risks, and assistance needs. So in the first one, in governance, what we want to know about is your city's current administrative structure. And how it addresses the local climate action agenda. So we want to know a bit about the structure, about who is tasked with the oversight of the climate agenda, what is the modality of collaboration, coordination, and exchange on these topics. And we want also to know a few details about your human resources, the current allocation, skills, and if the stuff that is already allocated is sufficient or not. Then there is a separate bunch of questions in this tab, which is looking at how do you collect data, if this is a regular exercise or not, which sort of sectors and sources it covers, and what do you do with the data you collect. So we want to have a bit of an understanding of what features that can be related to climate neutrality you're keeping track of, and in which way. So let's move to the first question, which is general question on the overall capacity and organization. So we ask you to indicate the fields in which your city has the legal powers to act, make policy decisions. So here, what we want to understand is which fields the city has a sort of direct control on. So if it has the power to act, to make decisions, to set a direction, even just to set a criterion. So we want to understand if there is any field here in the list where the city has a sort of direct control. And you may, like an example could be a mayor that owns or has control over an energy provider or a transport provider. By knowing this, we know that some of these fields can be tackled in a sort of collective, organic, and fast way. And by setting the direction towards the green and smart transition, for example. You may notice that in this list here, we cover the critical sectors that are mentioned in the climate neutrality definition that stands within the mission. So we go for energy-related fields, transport-related fields, waste and wastewater management, as also industrial and agricultural emissions. But we also touch on some other fields that may be largely impacted by climate policy decisions. So we want to make sure to have an understanding of what the city can do in both direct impacted fields and possible co-fields. As a follow-up question, we ask you to describe your current climate governance, including horizontal oversight of climate mitigation policies. So here our interest is in two aspects, basically. The first one is about knowing the entity or the entities with primary responsibilities for climate mitigation policies and cross-sector coordination of the climate agenda. And here we come with a list of possible examples. For example, dedicated department unit, committee, a dedicated person, an external body, and so on and so forth. The second thing that we want to know is the working modality. So we want to know who and in which way. About the current climate governance. After asking this question, we want to know for how long the selected governance structure has been in place. And here you have three options: less than 1 year, less than 5 years, for longer than 5 years. Then in the event that your city is selected for the mission and develops a climate city contract, is your city considering changing or adapting the current governance structure? Of course, in this case, we provide a definition of what a climate city contract is and its importance within the city's mission, just for you to have a reference to it. And you can reply with a yes or no answer option. Of course, if you go for no, nothing happens. But if you select yes, we want to know more about it. So there is no wrong or right answer to this question. It's not a problem if the current structure needs revision for tackling a fast journey towards climate neutrality. Here you're invited to describe the desired change in case and indicate why this should be considered necessary. So this is about the current structure and this forward-looking question about what change could be envisaged. The second part on this tab is about staff capacity and skills. So we first ask, do you think that there is sufficient staff available to design and implement a climate city contract with the help of the mission platform? So here we ask if there is sufficient staff. And when we think about sufficient, we need to keep in mind both the amount of people working on it, the level of skills, and we have a bunch of options to reply to this question. Yes, so we believe that there are enough people and they have enough skills. And then the second option is we are undertaking steps to allocate additional staff to this work. So it's already a work in progress. The option no, and another equally valid answer option is not known at this stage. Then we ask more specifically about training and skills. So do you think that the city staff is currently sufficiently trained and skilled to design and implement climate neutrality policies? So you may notice that here is the first time in the step that we explicitly mention climate neutrality policies. So we want you to focus on zeroing emissions. So if you have enough and sufficiently trained staff to go for such an ambitious target. And here we have like some options that are considered like they're put in a sort of graded manner. So we first go for yes across sectors and also at sectoral level for all the sectors that are relevant to climate neutrality. Then the second option is missing the cross-sectoral part. So it's yes in all sectors relevant to climate neutrality. The third one is covering a sectoral approach, but it's considering only sectors that are critical to the city. And to specify what critical means in the context of this question, we provide a definition in the alt text. So you can see that critical sectors are those with the highest mitigation potential, namely they account for the highest share of emissions. Another option is that you have sufficiently trained and skilled staff, but only in some sectors relevant to climate neutrality. And then the other options, no and not known. Then we ask, in which specific aspects would your administration or staff benefit the most in terms of capacity building? And here I want to flag a couple of features of this question. The first one is that you're required to select at most 5 choices. So here we have an upper threshold just to demonstrate the ability of this of the questionnaire to pick that you selected more than what was originally required. You get this warning in case you exceed the threshold. And the second point that I would like to make is that you have a sort of subsectioning in the answer options. So you may notice that some of them refer to skills, a bunch of them refer to knowledge, and another bunch to innovation. So about skills, we focus our attention on the design of mitigation actions, project development through pre-feasibility to finance ready, implementation and project management, monitoring, reporting, and verification, investment planning, anticipation foresight. So we want to understand if it's about skills in anticipating trade-offs, spillover effects, all this sort of additional consequences that may come when dealing with climate neutrality. And then we have communications, computing, and data analysis, and this hence the skills subsection. Then for knowledge, we want to know if you would require more of a general knowledge on climate neutrality, specific knowledge on the topic, cross-sectoral knowledge on the topic, if you need to know more about climate finance or about digitalization and smart city solutions. Then in terms of innovation, we want to know if you need to develop capacity for applying knowledge in practice, procuring RNI solutions or implementing RNI solutions, or to adapt to new situations or generate new ideas. Of course, this is a possibility for categorizing these options, but we also provide the possibility to go for other, and then you can freely express what your administration or staff would benefit the most. Then we ask you, could your city administration offer support or training to other cities with respect to the design and implementation of climate neutrality policies? So this is a yes or no option. None of them comes with follow-up questions. So we just want to investigate if you would be interested in some sort of mentoring or twinning activities. So in sharing in a structural way what's like providing support or training to other cities on the same journey. This is all about the current structure of the governance and about human resources. Now, this is the part about data collection and reporting. And we ask you, is your city regularly collecting reporting data on the areas and or the sectors indicated in the table below? So here I want to stress the fact that we are looking at regular collections or reporting. So this is a sort of exercise that is done with a given frequency or repeatedness in time. In the table, then we don't just have these sectors that are mentioned in the question. We also have a spatial dimension. So we want to understand if this data collection or reporting is covering the entire city and nothing else, is covering only parts of the city, is covering only municipal buildings and facilities operations, is covering the whole city and adjoining areas, or it just doesn't occur. Then the three sectors that are mentioned here are like energy in a general manner, so inclusive of generation and consumption. We have transport, which includes kilometers traveled, mode share, infrastructure, and we have wastewater generation, collection, and treatment. Now, if you don't collect or report that on a regular basis for any of these sectors, you're going to click no in this table and nothing else appears related to data collection and reporting, but this follow-up question. However, if you select any of the yes options for these sectors, then we have a bunch of follow-up questions which take the same exact form for each sector that you selected. So let's take a look at the energy. For example, we ask you, if you selected energy, generation, and consumption, please specify the typical frequency of the data collection reporting. So this brings you back to the original question, which is about regular exercises. So if it's regular, we do expect to have a frequency with which this exercise occurs. And here we have 4 options: at least annually, at least every 2 years, at least every 4 years, less frequently than every 4 years. The follow-up question is about specifying the year of the latest data collection report. And in this case, please be consistent with the previous provided answers, and also consider values only between 2000 and 2021, also because we would not consider some sort of data collection that happened before as a regular exercise. Then we have a question about the sectors and the sources that are covered. And for energy, we go through different typologies of buildings and facilities: residential, commercial, institutional, industrial. Then we cover street lighting. We will cover both renewable and non-renewable energy generation, cogeneration, district heating and cooling, energy production from wastewater, local heat and cold storage, and you have the option to go for other and specify. Now, the transport sector is exactly the same. Of course, what changes is the list of sectors and sources that can be included in the third question. So we have some options about kilometer traveled or similar for passenger cars and urban freight and logistics. Then we have some options for mode share, including public transport, cycling, walking, micromobility. Then we're also interested in knowing if your city is collecting real-time transport data and if you're keeping track of new transport technologies. And again, you have the option to go for other and specify what this refers to. Same again for wastewater. So if you selected wastewater, please specify which sectors and sources are included. And then we have a limited number of options, but we include private homes, households, businesses and industry, public services, for example, schools, hospitals, municipal buildings, and again, other. So again, if you tick no, for example, let's say that we don't regularly collect data on wastewater, this bunch of questions for waste just disappear. And for those who were not here during the last webinar, in case you populate one of this section and then you just decide that this section is not really should not really be populated or is not part of it, the EU survey retains the information. So if you click back on the same option, you would see the answers that you already put there previously. Then even if you don't have in place any regular data collection or reporting, you get this follow-up question. So this considers both regular and irregular data collections. We want to know if you work in partnership with other stakeholders to collect the data on issues that concern or are linked to climate change mitigation. If you go for no, nothing happens. If you go for yes, of course, we would like to know which are the stakeholders. And we have 3 different levels of government: academia and R&I institutions, private sector, trade unions, NGOs and associations, utilities, citizens, and other. And if other, you can specify. Then this completes the part on data. Now we want to know how your city's climate change policies are monitored, evaluated, and updated. Basically, we want to know, what do you do with this data? Do you use it somehow to monitor what you're doing, to evaluate what you're doing, or to update your policies? And here again, we have a table-like option. So we both cover these 3 dimensions of monitoring, evaluation, and update. And we also cover the frequency. So if this is a regular exercise or not. And we have the options annually, at least every 3 years, at least every 5, irregularly or less frequently than 5 years, and no process in place. Now, in this case, whatever option you select in this table, there is no follow-up question. So this bunch of questions concludes here. The final one is about disclosure. So here we want to know if you're making your data or like any action towards climate neutrality or towards climate change mitigation openly available. And we ask you, is your city regularly disclosing on climate action and the progress towards achieving its climate targets? If it's a no answer, then nothing happens. If it's yes, we kind of ask the same typology of questions we asked before for the sectoral questions. And we ask about the frequency of disclosure, because again, the main question is about regularly disclosing. So again, there is a regular dimension to be considered. And we ask if the frequency is at least annually, at least every 2 years, at least every 4 years, or less frequently than every 4 years. We want to know the year of the latest report. And again, please be consistent. And we want to know the way of disclosing. So here we have some well-defined options: through My Covenant, through CDP CLAY Unified Reporting System, through national platform and systems, on publication of reports, or other. Now here in the answer options already know that if you tick some of them, you will be asked to specify. So if you click on either national platforms, own publication of reports, and other, any of this, you get this follow-up question when you're asked to please specify which sort of way of disclosing this is referring to. So this is all about the tab regarding governance. So we may possibly stop here if we have questions to take, or I can just go ahead.
All right, let's see if we have any more questions coming in. Or not, I don't see any. We're answering quite a few as we go. So we'll just pause for a second here and see. Otherwise, I'll encourage you to go ahead here in a minute. All right, here's a couple now. We published annually a sustainable development report. Does it count as disclosure, but does not contain all the numbers? Does not contain so much numbers. So if it's not a quantitative report, but a program discussion, I would say that's probably not a disclosure on the emission side, but you should make note of what you do publish and make public.
Yeah, I would also indeed agree. Like, disclosure can have different forms, and if you disclose on your activities, but you don't maybe go into the details of the quantification of their impact, I'd still take the opportunity and mention it. And indeed, you have then the possibility to specify. So. I'd agree.
Legal power is often shared between local and national levels. Should we indicate areas where the city has some legal power or only a fully legal powers?
So in this question, we ask you to reflect on the fields in which your city has the legal powers to act or make policies decisions. So if the answer to this question is yes, even if it's partly or fully, I would indicate which field you're referring to.
Yeah, indeed. I would tend to think that if you have some authority, even if it's shared with senior government, you have the ability to influence and you should respond affirmatively. Okay, Julia, let's keep going. We'll stay on track, and if any more questions come up, we can always circle back.
Perfect. Okay, so the last section of this questionnaire is about barriers, risks, and assistance needs. So here is where we want to gather, we want you to reflect about what you think are the obstacles or the gaps or the assistance need that you would require during the city's mission process in order to get to the target. So here is a bunch of non-qualifying nor excluding questions, but they are extremely informative from our side, because this is where we will start the process of tailor-making services through the mission platform and to make it as responsive as feasible. So this is where we will be trying to tackle everything that might be considered a barrier for you to get to the target, or if there is any sort of gap that needs to be filled, but also to anticipate risks. So this is an extremely important part of the questionnaire, and we invite the cities to fill all the questions as carefully as possible. Just few words about the overall structure of this part of the questionnaire. We first have some questions about the main barriers, gaps, and assistance needs across sectors, and then at the sector-specific level, focusing on energy, transport, and wastewater management. Then there is a second part, which is about a self-assessment. So we will just propose some statements and ask the city how much it relates to these statements. As a final exercise is the risk assessment. Now, this is not a real risk assessment, so we are not asking you to take note through a matrix of the likelihood and the impact of any risk that can happen, but we want you to reflect about the most important ones, where most important means both high impact and high likelihood. And we provide you with some categories, with some risk sources in order to guide you through answering this question. So let's go back to the first question. We ask you, what are the main barriers, gaps, assistance needs that your city envisages in pursuing climate neutrality by 2030? So for these sort of questions, I want to highlight three things. First of all, the text is extremely useful, so please look at it, read the different options that are clarified there. Second thing is that, again, you have an upper threshold. So for example, for this initial question, you can select up to 5 options, up to 6, sorry. This means that this is an exercise of prioritizing. We want you to reflect about the most important of these field sectors options. And the third thing that I would like to highlight is that we touch both on objective barriers, gaps, assistance needs, but we also touch a bit on the behavioral or the perception dimension, which indeed can be a risk, can be a barrier or a gap in itself. So this first question is going across sectors, and we provide you with some options. Some of them are pretty straightforward to interpret. Some of them may require some definition. For example, we have regulatory red tape, where we refer to all the set of burdensome administrative rules and procedures that may hinder the final realization of the city's mission target. So we are looking at bureaucratic obstacles. When we talk about geomorphic or topographic limitations and challenges, we are looking at different dimensions that are linked to how the city looks like. So what is the geomorphic type? Meaning, is it a coastal city? Is it a mountainous city or valley city? And then we look at the soil, like about the slope, the type, the pollution, if it has problems with irrigation and drainage. But also we are touching upon geological hazards like earthquakes, tsunamis, floods, forest fires, droughts. So any sort of barrier that can come from these sources. Then we look into growth schemes, limitations, and challenges. This is all about how the city has been expanding or will expand in the future. So we want to understand if we should consider any barrier coming from the typology of growth. So if we need to consider urban sprawl, issues connected to the centeredness, connectivity, density, and land use mix. For climate limitations and challenges, see, this is different from geological hazards that are earthquakes, tsunamis, because we are looking at the background climate, but also the microclimate that exists within the city. So we want to know about the proclivity to extreme weather events like heat, cold, wind, windlessness, rainfall, and so on and so forth. So all these may come with potential barriers and may require assistant needs in order to provide a reaction and still get to the target by 2030. You have the option to select also other in case none of these options reflect one of the 6 most important barriers or gaps or assistant needs across sectors, and you can specify. Then just for the cross-sectoral question, we would like you to identify and elaborate on the cross-cutting barriers, gaps, and assistance needs that are most critical in your city's journey towards climate neutrality, if any. Here in the alt text, we remind you that you may need to consider local specificities because usually local specificities require devising bespoke countermeasures, which may be not readily available. So this would be a valuable information for us to know. At a sector-specific level, we ask you what barriers, gaps, assistance needs specific to the energy sector does your city expect to encounter when pursuing climate neutrality by 2030? And here the limit is 4 choices. So again, we have a bunch of options and some of them may require a definition or further explanation. So please consult the alt text. We can go through some of them now together, just for the sake of making an example. For example, subsidies for competing fuels. This usually happens between fossil fuels and renewable energy. So if large subsidies are given to fossil fuels and then not equally large subsidies are given to renewable energy, this creates a competitive disadvantage. And we also provide you with some examples for what a subsidy is that can include budgetary transfers, tax incentives, R&D spending, liability, and so on and so forth. Then we have difficulty of fuel price risk assessment. Here we want to know if there is any barrier that is associated with fluctuations in the future fuel prices, which may just change the way decisions are taken in the way about new power generation capacity. Then just to mention some more transaction costs, this again is about renewables and conventional energy projects, because due to the different size of these projects, the renewable ones may be discouraged by higher transaction costs, which include resource assessment, siting, permitting, planning, developing proposals, assembling financing packages, and so on. Then another interesting one, which needs a bit of explanation, is the tendency to overlook environmental externalities. What we mean by this is that it may happen that when taking the final decisions, some costs are not really considered, and environmental costs tend to be part of it. So it may happen that you're not considering the impacts on human health, on the infrastructure decay, declines in forest and fisheries, and other costs that are directly linked to the environmental sector. So then there is one option about perception. So for example, perceived technology, performance, uncertainty, and risk. This refers to the lack of visibility and familiarity with sustainable energy technologies. That can lead to a higher technical risk, can come with higher rates of return or less capital availability. So all these sort of risks and barriers and gaps that may arise because of a perception. So here we want also to include this dimension. And on top of these options, we would also like to know if there is any site-specific constraint or any other sort of barriers, gaps, and assistance needs in the energy sector. So if you select any of these two options at the bottom, you get follow-up questions to specify it. And when we talk about site-specific constraints, we really want you to reflect about your territory, about something that is linked to the city specificities. Then we have the twin question about the transport sector. And again, we have some explanations here. So we have subsidies for competing fuels and the same definition as for energy spend. So please look at the previous alt text. Then we have lack of cross-modal ticketing and payment systems. So here we're looking at barriers against modal shifts. So if there is no system for the purchase of tickets in one go, this would enable passengers to travel using different transport modes. So we would like to know if this is a gap, an assistance need. Then we have inefficient or non-existent time variable road pricing. So here we are talking about variable tolls, also congestion pricing schemes, and anything else related to trying to reduce the peak period traffic volumes to optimal levels. And we also provide some references. Again, we also touch on the behavioral dimension. So some of the options are people's time and economic constraints in the use of public transport, psychosocial barriers either to active travel or public transport use, or automated transport systems, for example, driverless shuttles. And then again, we provide you with possibility to specify site-specific constraints and other options. And again, another questions follows. For waste and wastewater management sector, the definitions are much less. It's just one because they are pretty straightforward and comprehensible. So like we have insufficient data collection, inefficient energy recovery of waste, inefficient waste prevention. But then we look also at the people's dimension again. So we include slow behavioral transformation, including cultural barriers, limited community engagement and support, but also spread of illegal practices in shipping, dumping, and burning waste. Weaker norms outside the EU, which incentivize waste export, and downcycling, which is the one that is mentioned in the definition, which means recycling waste into products of inferior quality or reduced functionality. Then again, you have the other option in case we didn't pick the one of the four most important barriers, gaps, and assistance needs within your territory. So this is all about this first part of this tab. Now we go into the self-assessment. As mentioned before, this part is like a series of statements which we provide you, and we want you to rate how much you relate to what is stated. So we ask to rate how much your city relates to the following statements on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is cannot relate and 5 is very much relates. So you may notice that the first questions are about favorable conditions, while the very last ones are considering other boundary conditions. So even if there are no favorable conditions as the one listed in the first statements, then there might be some other sort of enabling boundary conditions. So for example, we ask the city, like the statement is, the city can rely on a growing, young, and above average educated and skilled population. So that's an option for favorable conditions, but it can also be a favorable economic condition such as high salaries and tax revenues. Or it could be a supportive local research environment. Then we have two options about processes like fast authorization process and fast funding financing process. Then we want to know if the city can rely on a consolidated communication platform with proven success in disseminating climate awareness. And also if it relies on own funding schemes and moderately resourced to external funding for its climate policies. While the last favorable condition is about the geoclimatic conditions. So we are including proximity to water bodies, moderate occurrence of climate extremes. And these are the options for favorable conditions. Then a bunch of different statements start with, the city cannot rely on any of the above favorable conditions, but something else happens. So the first possibility is that major obstacles to climate neutrality are not expected. that the fact that there are no favorable conditions is exactly what makes the pathway to climate neutrality of the city a textbook example for many other similar cities to follow. We want to know if recent R&I solutions offer the potential to enable at least one of the favorable conditions that we listed in the initial statements. And then we want to know if it's the right time. So if it's the so-called policy window to place and prioritize the topic of urban climate neutrality on the agenda. Or even if there is no favorable condition, the city has a history of coping with it by pioneering climate policies with creative approaches like seeking collaborations or networking or participating in exploratory studies. The final possibility and the final statement is even if there are no favorable conditions, the city has already secured enough internal and external funding, financing for climate related projects to become a pioneer. So for each of these statements, you can tell us how much you relate to it, where 1 is the very minimum level and 5 is the maximum level. So the follow-up question is about all the statements where you selected 1 or 5. So please don't select 2 or 4 just not to answer this question. It is very valuable to know if an extreme condition applies to your city. So here you have the space to just describe why your city really doesn't relate or fully relates to one of the statements, or even more than one. This concludes the part on the self-assessment, and we can go to the risk assessment. Again, this is not like a formal risk assessment. What we want you to do is to identify and comment on high impact and high likelihood risks that could impact the achievement of your city's climate neutrality target by 2030. So as we all know, the risk assessments come in different stages. We just want to stop at the first one, so the identification of the risks and possibly have in mind their impacts, because this is needed to define which are the highest impact and highest likelihood risks. Also, we come with some sort of suggestion by providing you lists of risk sources, where a risk source is a fundamental internal or external driver that causes risks. So it's possibly where the risk can originate. And all these definitions are provided in the alt text. So if you're not familiar with any of these terminologies, please take a look there. We identify different categories, and for each category, we provide in the alt text a number of risk sources. These are not exhaustive. These are just for you to have an idea what we are talking about, what is included in the category, so that you can think about high impact and high likelihood risks coming from any of these sources. So for example, for leadership, strategic planning and political risk sources, we have a bunch of examples. For example, political will, change turnover in government, consensus, political environment, and so on and so forth. For category 2, which is finance risk sources, we have financial management, legislative and industry requirements, legal costs, but also corruption and fraud or fluctuation in rates, market currencies, and inflation. For category 3, which is about regulatory risk sources, we go from legislative requirements to legal liabilities, licenses to operate, or departmental guidelines. So here are a bunch of other options for thinking about the sources of risk. Then for category 4, which is about operational risk sources, we have, again, some examples ranging from policies and procedures to external outsourced functions, procurement, legal compliance, system failures, conflicts of interest, and many other more. For category 5, which is about organizational risk sources, we have managerial responsibilities, policies and procedures, governance, monitoring, independence and quality of evaluation, knowledge management, budget availability and cash flow, procurement. For category 6, about partnerships, stakeholder, and in general, the working together dimension, we come up with this list. So we include stakeholder relationships and engagement, organizational relations, leadership, communication, but also public opinion and media. For category 7, which is about social risk sources, we touch on social equality, social inclusion, human rights. We also touch on something that is relatively new to the world of climate change mitigation. So issues like gentrification, displacement and resettlement, but also energy poverty, transport poverty, and poverty in itself. And for energy poverty and transport poverty, we remind you that we have definitions in previous tabs of the questionnaire. Environmental risk sources are about biodiversity, environmental disaster, pollution, urban Italian effect, and also interference with natural cycles, for example, migrations flows. And category 9 is the last one. It's about safety and security. So here we mention cybersecurity, man-made hazards, civil unrest, work health, and safety as some of the options. So again, I'd like to stress that here you have to talk about the risk. What we are providing you are the risk sources. So it's a source of inspiration for thinking about where the risks come from. But we want you to focus on the risk itself, and it has to be high impact and high likelihood. Again, this part of the questionnaire is for you a reflection on understanding what could go wrong or what could be something that we should start thinking about at this stage in order to provide bespoke and tailor-made assistance to make sure that you go smoothly towards the target. And that's the conclusion of the questionnaire. And if there is any question that we can take, we can answer it now.
Thanks, Julia. We have a couple of questions I think are worth bringing up we haven't quite answered yet. One is could you please repeat whether we focus only on categories we consider most important and likely to occur, or rather say something on everything?
Yeah, again, most of these questions come with an upper threshold. So per se, this is an invitation on focusing on what is considered most important, most critical on different dimensions. Of course, usually the dimensions that are considered are the frequency of occurrence and the expected impact, the expected damages or slowdown in the process. So definitely this is what you should be considering in answering these questions.
Thank you. And then I think this is pretty evident what to do here, but one is with regard to risks, to which extent the COVID crisis can be flagged as an accurate risk in terms of difficulties for strategic planning or citizen events, capacity building, climate actions, postponements, etc. So do we want to give any advice or guidance there in terms of how to respond to that?
Every time you answer these questions about the risks, don't think of risks in a very general manner. They have to be risks, solid risks, high impact likelihood towards climate neutrality. So if you believe that the COVID crisis has impacted some of the dimensions that are part of the definition of climate neutrality within this mission, then you can definitely include it.
Great, thanks so much. We have one more who's come in. High risk and impact cold also be geopolitics, like worsening relations between the US and China, hampering trade, technology supply, or others to be included. These are very hard for a city to address.
I mean, if this impacts your city specifically, and you believe that this is going to be a risk in reaching climate neutrality by 2030 within the city's mission, yes. I will always think about the context of all these questions. If they fit in the context, then they are all welcome.
Yeah. And then we've had one for a while here. Under the heading self-assessment, applicant cities must estimate how well a number of statements agree with the city's work. After statement 8, there are 6 statements, all of which begin with, the city cannot rely on any of the above favorable conditions. If a city answers 4 or 5 to the question, the city can rely on favorable geoclimatic conditions, e.g., for example, proximity to water bodies, moderate occurrence of climate extremes. Subsequent questions become non-questions because we can actually rely on favorable conditions. All subsequent questions become irrelevant and impossible to answer as they are now. How should we interpret these questions?
You just stop there. Like if you rely on a favorable condition, you don't answer the questions about having no favorable conditions. Again, this part is all about gathering information. So if a statement or a specific question doesn't fit your case, just disregard it.
Perfect. Thanks for that additional clarification.
Can I add something here? I mean, it's a graded answer, and if you cannot relate or it's not applicable, I think the most complete way of doing it would probably to select one. Like
Yeah.
if it's the contrary of something that you have selected above, or as Julia said, if something is not applicable, you're not forced to tick anything. But in the context of this specific table, if it's not applicable, then yeah, it would be the first. You cannot relate. Can I add something also? Sorry, I see this question on risk assessments, political risk and high risks also that come from changes in national government. Absolutely. I mean, these are all things that can have a considerable impact. So you are absolutely allowed to look beyond the boundaries of your city, as long as Julia outlined, it does have an actual impact or an expected impact on what you're trying to achieve locally.
Yes, excellent, thanks. Vipka, I think you wanted to just respond on a couple of points that have been, I think, sort of emerging as either across a few different comments or questions and are more general. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that, and we still have a little bit of time for a few more questions if they're coming in.
Yes, exactly. Thanks a lot, Thomas. I wanted to make two general comments. One is, you have now seen a lot of questions presented in all of in a lot of detail and in different sections. Maybe to some of you that might sound a little bit intimidating. So I'd just like to reassure you that we are not now asking for a complete picture of and your answers to every single question if you don't have all of this information. The purpose, as has been said before, is to try and have a picture that is as complete as we can have at this stage, but it is absolutely okay to tick not available or to leave a few questions out in any of those sections that we have presented today, and also in the sections that we presented the last time. The only sections that are really absolutely decisive for eligibility are the first two ones. So the information about your city, about the size of your city, and crucially, of course, your ambition towards climate neutrality and wanting to become part of the mission. And that brings me to the second point, which is, I saw some exchanges in the chat about the timelines. So what we're asking at this stage is that you express your city's ambition to be part of the mission, and that means to sign up to the to want to work towards the 2030 timeline. So we're not asking for a commitment to this timeline at this stage, but we're asking if your city has the ambition to work towards this timeline. And if you already have existing timelines that are 2040 or 2050, or also if you have no timelines, that is at this point is not important. I mean, we want to know about it, of course, but the idea of the mission is to accelerate timelines. So if you have an existing timeline of 2040, for example, this mission would give you hopefully the chance to speed up the process and to get help to bring all of this further forward. But this timeline 2030 is actually for us a strict condition. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Oh, there's a very detailed question on the intake form about attachment file size. Is it 5 megabytes per attachment or per uploading section?
It's per file, and you can attach as many as you want. Yeah, so, but each file itself has a limit of 5 megabytes.
Great, thank you for that. Vika, do we have an update on how many cities pre-registered for the EOI that you want to share?
About 230.
230.
Pre-registered.
Please explain the difference between pilot cities and twin cities. Yeah, why don't I take that? So the Net Zero Cities program will be putting out a call in the mid 2022, maybe perhaps September, because summer is not necessarily a good time to put out calls, a call for cities who want to do pilots for climate neutrality based on 2030. And so that call will fund and support up to 30 pilots amongst these cities. With each of those cities that's selected, we will establish at least 2 other cities as twin cities who would be brought along in terms of a shared learning, peer learning about the specific activities of that particular pilot. So the difference between the pilots and the twins is that the pilot will be focused on the city that it responds, and then we'll identify 2 or potentially 3 cities that we would twin with that particular city based on the nature of the project activity. Julia, just to confirm, this comes back to the self-assessment. To tick the boxes for the city cannot rely on any of the above favorable conditions. It is mandatory to have ticked only level 1 for all of the above favorable conditions.
So I would say in tackling this whole section of the questionnaire, there is no strict rule in what you should be taking or not. If you think that an information is valuable, you have the opportunity here to state it. If, for example, you don't relate to some of these options and you think it's worth knowing about it, just tick 1, even if it's not consistent with like the favorable or unfavorable conditions. So you can give us more specifications in the follow-up.
Very good. That's super helpful. So we have just a few minutes left. I don't see any new questions coming in. We'll hold on for a few minutes in case there are any last ones coming. I just want to maybe offer a few more comments here. All these webinars will remain accessible on the website, which has been linked. This one, as soon as it's available, will be posted as well. So all 3 will be up there, along with the information kit, the FAQ, and so on and so forth. I would also say that if questions arise, you can certainly use the website to pose additional questions to us. And you can also reach out through Net Zero Cities through our website if you have additional questions or clarification that you need help with throughout the process. So this isn't the last chance you have to ask questions, but what we've tried to do is give people enough information that they can begin to prepare their response to with the expression of interest call and begin assembling the materials that are necessary. And from that point forward, obviously, please reach out with questions as you have them. And we will continue to provide information and clarifications as much as possible. Vipka, do you have any final comments? I think, Michael, while we're just on the line here, you just put Nicoletta, if you scroll up the chat, you're going to see the links to the website. And that's where all the information will be.
We can post it again, maybe, and also the
it's just a few scrolls up, but we can post it one more time at the end.
And our email address as well. We can put in the chat again.
Great.
For follow-up questions, which now maybe I could say that it may be that you're wondering about specific circumstances for your city that maybe haven't been completely covered and that are very specific to your city. In that case, really don't hesitate to be in touch by email, and then we can really look at your case separately and give a really well-informed answer to you.
Indeed. Thanks again. All right. Well, I know we're approaching the end of the time. I want to thank the panelists again for their efforts to provide clarifications and information and answer questions. I want to thank everybody who joined from all of the cities who are interested in this. And again, feel free to keep in touch with us if you have questions or need more clarification or support in preparing your response. This isn't a process in which you're not encouraged to get in touch with us. You're encouraged to get in touch with us. So we'll look forward to hearing from you all. In the meantime, I think we'll wrap up and close this off. And I'll give you a few minutes here to capture the links in the chat that are flowing right now. But otherwise, I want to wish you all the best as we transition into the holiday season, and we'll look forward to communicating with you, hearing from you, and so on as we move forward through this process. So thanks again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week.
Thanks, Thomas, for hosting, and thank you all.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.